My name is Kate Field. I'm a member of the Freshkills Park development team. And I'm most really just going to turn it over, though, to, we have Dylan. Dylan, you want to wave?
Hey,
Nancy?
everybody.
Hi.
And Morgan. All right. And I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to talk a little bit about art at Freshkills Park and Nancy and Morgan's piece, Fieldwork.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. And oh, hi, Mario. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Kate and Laura, for hosting tonight. And thanks, Nancy and Morgan, for being willing to participate. And thanks, Meryl Kelly, for being here and for being the co-founding curator of the Freshkills Field R&D project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea for the project and its inception, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about Nancy and Morgan, and then hand it over to Nancy to talk more about her work. So I'm Dylan Gauthier. I'm an artist and independent curator, and I also run the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts project space in Midtown Manhattan. And this project, the Field R&D project at Freshkills, which is housed within the Freshkills Park Alliance, is a multi-year kind of experimental approach to thinking through relationships around art, research, and inquiry in Freshkills as not just a natural site and a living, evolving, changing site within the city that is both the city's largest or the world's largest social sculpture, as Meryl Kelly has put it, but is also a site of research and real work. And I think that the theme of tonight's talk around Nancy Nowacek's piece Fieldwork is really interesting and appropriate given the kind of work that we're all doing remotely right now, the fact that we are all kind of making sense of this new kind of post-natural, post-coronavirus time that we're living in. And Freshkills Park is if you know the site at all, was the largest landfill in New York City, is slated to become the largest park, right? Largest single park in New York City, probably almost 3 times the size of Central Park, 2,200 acres. And in the development and the transition from landfill to park have been a number of really incredible forward-thinking artists and curators and designers who've been involved in thinking through how to approach that site, right? So in back of Kate's virtual landscape, or virtual background of the Freshkills landscape, we see that it already doesn't exactly look like a landfill, and what's being regenerated there is the result of collaborations between engineers and designers and planners, and of course the Department of Sanitation, Department of Transportation. So there's bureaucrats, there's policymakers, there's public will, there's intervention by local residents on the state and federal level, and so you have this kind of composite experience happening in the site. And one of the things that Marielle and Marielle was the former programs manager for Freshkills Park when she started this project with me. And one of the things we've been talking about was how artists who have a research-based practice, so artists who are researching the world around them and making that research part of the work they produce, we're already being invited in through the started thinking about what kind of research were they doing and how could that research be in conversation with, say, the work of policymakers, the work of the science researchers, such as Kate, who are out there, counting birds and blades of grass and making sure everything is growing. And so how could we kind of bring in artists as interlocutors on the kind of work that was happening on site? So we conceived of this program, and we were hugely, grateful and benefited hugely from an initial seed grant from the Donald and Shelley Rubin Foundation, which provided money for us to, bring in artists and actually give them honoraria for their work. And of course, Freshkills is not a site that you can access even usually, right, outside of Discovery Day, unless you're a sanitation worker or you work for parks or DOT, most of the park is not accessible to the public. So we were thinking through what it would mean to have an artist residency in a place like that, where artists couldn't just come and go freely, and there's no studio space and there's no real facilities, and so already we were kind of operating in the realm of the imaginary, the narrative, the again the kind of research approach to artists are often involved in their work. The idea was to assemble a kind of working group, almost like a think tank, that would be given access to all of the, the tools and channels and information and knowledge that Meryl and others at the Freshkills Park Alliance have amassed, and then also the connections that they've made with the independent and which again, Department of Transportation. Am I forgetting someone in that? Parks, New York City Parks. And so our first iteration was really just kind of a pilot test run, and we had put out an invitation to artists that we knew were already kind of working in this realm or had some kind of strong connection to Staten Island, because we wanted there to be a real kind of local connection. And so Gabby Krista, who's a choreographer and dancer and visual artist, along with Billy Dufala and the Dufala brothers, who run a residency in Philadelphia called the Recycled Artists in Residency, or RARE, which is amazing. It's actually at a waste separation and receiving facility in Pennsylvania, a private one. We initially had worked with Tarkwasi Dyson, who's an amazing artist and architect, Mary Mattingly, whose work you may know from other parks projects such as Swale, New York City's floating food forest, and whose work really pushes these the kind of what an artist can do in relation to policy as it's being made, and how can an artist's creative work also help us identify the kinds of policies that we need to make. Lizzie Mogul, also an artist working with a counter cartography kind of construct, where it's an artist as geographer. What can an artist reveal about the land as a site, and as a multi-layered, dynamic place. Audrey Snyder and Joe Riley, and who are an artist collective who also work with a collective called Future Farmers, and are really interdisciplinary in practice, blending video and performance, and have been working on issues around waste and extraction for a number of years. And of course, Nancy Nowacek, who's joining us tonight. And so this was our first cohort. It was an incredible group. We had, also the goodwill and blessing of people like Rubin Nagel, who's the the researcher, anthropologist in residence for the Department of Sanitation, Robin, and we invited Robin and others who know more about the site and know more about the relationships that are part of making that site what it is, to come and share their knowledge, and as formally or informally as they chose to. So we had monthly meetings where everybody in the cohort would get together. We'd meet at various locations around the city, or we'd go out and visit the landfill site itself. And so we're currently working with our second cohort, which is smaller. It's a little bit more discreet, which actually, given what we're now going through, has made it necessary, I think, because obviously getting together and going to the site together is not currently possible. But in the second cohort, we have the artist Jen Liu, Stowe Len, and Antonio Serna, and three really interesting artists working in different media, really different approaches. Stowe's work is largely around waterways and also printmaking. Antonio Serna investigates relationships of power, history, and representation. And Jen Liu's work spans video, painting, and performance to investigate a kind of an artist approach to very, very I'd say recherche kinds of science questions. And so these, of this entire group, we are working toward an exhibition, which we're as soon as we can do exhibitions again, we will present. An exhibition of the first year cohort was actually presented on site back in 2019, and on in one of the spaces that Parks has right there next to the landfill. I can talk more about this, and I'm happy to, and I will actually ask some questions later, because I have some questions for Nancy and for Morgan about their work. But I also just want to go ahead and introduce Nancy and Morgan. And so I think I'll, let me start with Nancy, who I know better now and than Morgan, who I'm just meeting in person, though I've been admiring your work with Nancy over the past years. But so Nancy Nowacek is an artist, designer, and educator. Her work focuses on the habits and practices of daily life as they relate to the natural and built environment and the systems that produce and are produced in them. Her practice encompasses a wide spectrum of research, including climate change, wastegapes, urban water ecology, environmental regulation, the history of labor, and feminism and aging. She's presented works in New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Windsor, Toronto, Caracas, and Amsterdam, and has lectured, participated on panels and roundtables, run workshops extensively in academic, art, design, cultural, and educational contexts across North and South America. And Morgan Hille-Refakis is, am I pronouncing that correctly, Morgan? It's okay. Okay, thank you. Is a dancer and choreographer from Fort Wayne, Indiana. She has degrees in dance and journalism from Rutgers University. For many years, she was co-producer of Your Move, Jersey City's modern dance festival. And currently she's residing in Hong Kong. Hence, yes, she's in the future teaching Pilates and wearing a mask when outdoors. Thank you. And thank you, Morgan and Nancy, both again for being here and sharing your work. And I think already just, thinking about your bios and backgrounds, really this project is all about interdisciplinarity and meeting halfway. And, where can artists, scientists, waste managers, urban planners, where can we all meet and discuss a future that we want to co-create? And I feel like, Field R&D has asked us to consider waste and our futures, and Freshkills Park is a place where hopefully we will continue to have those conversations and meet again in person. So I'll hand it over to Nancy and Morgan. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. That was a great intro. So I'm actually gonna start sharing my screen, everyone, because I realized I had things to show as I was talking instead of just having a bunch of talking heads. I thought I'd give you guys a few things to see as we talk. I'm gonna talk a little bit, and I'm gonna ask Morgan some questions. She's gonna talk a little bit, etc. So I'm gonna disappear. Right, so this is one of the first pictures I took of Freshkills Park. This is like in 2017. And all I can tell you is you can't see it in the park and you can't see my face right now, but I was dumbstruck. I was completely overwhelmed by the scale of the park and the fact that I couldn't see city. I couldn't see anything recognizable as urban environment in any direction that I looked. In fact, I thought I'd been transplanted to like a piece of the Midwestern prairie, like that had been set down in the middle of Staten Island. It was a completely unexpected experience. And so it was a real struggle to understand how to approach its enormity through research and art making, right? And then I spent a minute and then I thought, well, given my practice, which is really focused on the body, right? The aging body, the working body, the protesting body, the walking body, a coping body, a body coping with uncertainty, specifically the power and the politics of the body in a late capital, post-industrial changing climate, right? I came back to this idea of how important embodied experience and physical encounter are, specifically because they're, we're increasingly removed from them by smart devices, AI, and now pandemics, right? We're having an increasing loss of connection to the physical world and one another. And so in lots of my work, I address this loss of physical connection. And so I realized that I needed to take the park somehow into my body to understand it. Right, so as a kind of social sculpture that Dylan mentioned, or monument to consumption, my project at Freshkills became focused on reconnecting to ways in which bodies are present in the park, even though we can't see them, and the forms of physical labor that are present there, right? And this project actually has roots in following some scientists around in their fieldwork, hence the name of this project, coincidental with the name of the residency program. So I spent some time the summer of 2017 following some scientists in Cape Cod around with their fieldwork. They were doing some water quality testing. And what really dawned on me was that their work that I was watching, which was gathering information about the world, seemed to me to be a form of choreography constructed between their tools and the earth itself. And I was super fascinated that a big component of Freshkills is scientific study. And understanding how the park operates both as a big engineered man-made object and as nature. So the first phase of this project looked at the labor production of knowledge about the natural environment. So looking at this idea of scientific fieldwork as choreography. And actually, we were invited to create and perform a piece in Central Park as part of its big celebration of art in parks. Right? And here's a screenshot of what that piece looks like. And Morgan, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what it was like to do science, to perform science in Central Park in a performance context.
Right. I mean, if you just think of those words and then think of the action of them, you can kind of predict that it would be oddly successful but disruptive, because since the context was a performance, a site-specific performance of multiple groups of performers, like different times of the day, but the work was very task-oriented. So it looked like we were participating in something outside of a performance that the observers and audience, if you will, decided to participate along with us. And that was great. And we just kind of let people observe because we were observing. They, measured with us, they walked with us. We didn't exchange any dialogue with them, so they didn't really know what they were doing. We just went along with our choreography and with what we had planned to do. But I think actually Kate was there. And I think we were like, oh, of course this would happen. Like any site-specific performance would have some sort of, non-proscenium fourth wall kind of thing. And it was successful. And I think performing science is just an odd thing to think about, but then in practice, it works really well. Just like what Nancy was saying, between, choreographic tools are the same sort of tools that you would use in other forms of science as well. And so I think what this sealed for us is that you can put this kind of performative aspect on any sort of research and science.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, certainly after the performance of this piece, which I have to confess I wasn't able to attend because of my mother-in-law's 75th birthday. After hearing all the accounts of this work and seeing some video documentation of this work, I was like, oh yeah, it works because it's a kind of simulacra that's happening, but it seemed like there was more to explore. And I began to kind of think about all of the readings that we had done as a cohort, the conversations and presentations we'd experienced as a cohort. And I started thinking about, well, really, if science is what Freshkills Park is kind of producing today, right? That's the kind of labor it's producing today. What else aren't we seeing? What other forms of labor kind of are embedded in the park and work kind of help produce the park, right? And automatically I was thinking about the work of the sanitation department and the DOT and the engineers and the people that really helped transform the landfill to a park. But then I started thinking about all of the goods and discard embedded in the park and all of the people that made that. And so I really started connecting to, like, what I started connecting to is the whole history of work within the artifacts in Freshkills. So fieldwork then became a research project into the history of all the forms of labor embedded in its mound. So in a way, it's the history of like commodified work, from the Enclosure Act, which privatized land for agriculture, right, to the Industrial Revolution and the evolution of assembly lines, and finally to the advent of like global logistics and large-scale distribution and movement of goods. And so then I began to kind of trace these different choreographies through online videos, books, photographs, all forms of research I could find, film, video, photography, of agricultural, industrial, and logistic labor. And then I collected those things and I started making a lot of drawings. And basically I was like trying to take the movement in first through my hands and my eyes to kind of understand what I was looking at. And then those drawings, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of them, I started stringing together in front of my computer and sending them to Morgan and going, hey, what do you think? And so then we ended up with a series of phrases as Morgan we're testing them out in a dance studio in Lower Manhattan. We're testing them out and trying to kind of understand, right, the flow of the work. And so I want to ask Morgan, what's it like to learn all these forms of work, right? Like, what's it like to learn how to work, but not work? And what's it like teaching other dancers how to work instead of dance?
Well, one of the things that I think that we forgot, but I just remembered when I was thinking about today, is that we were actually thinking about not having dancers perform, right? We were just,
right.
We were going to have just anybody who wanted to participate. And then we got into it, and you look at these drawings and you look at these kind of the way that we were trying to make, you know, performance through labor and work. It would have been a lot longer of a process to teach non-movers how to move this way. Because it was even difficult for us to kind of string along phrases than to teach those phrases onto, you know, non-dancers, if you will, was a lot more challenging than you would think, because it's not that the movement is hard. I mean, they're 2 feet around the ground. It's not like they're kicking themselves in the face with their arms. You know, it's not like it's like Alvin Ailey modern dance. But it's really stylistic and really specific. And then if you apply that to the performative aspect, you're teaching dancers who are used to moving abstract and artistically to move intentionally and specifically. So it's like 180 with what dancers are usually doing. Yep. But with that said, because it is so specific and so exact, it's actually really easy to teach. And because of the memory that dancers have, it's really easy to kind of, I'm going to give you these 8 movements and you're going to do them repetitively. Because that's another thing that, you know, labor has, is that work has, is that it's just completely repetitive, for better or for worse, which we found as we were doing this work, our bodies would get stiff. We would, like this picture right here, we did this was agriculture, and we did this multiple times throughout the piece. And then we would, you know, saunter off camera and just kind of stand up and be like, oh man, you know, like it's the repetitive nature of work really does have an effect on your physicality. And that also implies into the performance too. So yeah, it was not as simple as you would think, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, it was a deceptively simple piece where it was simple but not simplistic, and the nuance, and I'd say actually the actual complexity of some of the movements was kind of staggering. There were some, I mean, the phrases that we created, I'd say that process probably took about 6 months. And it kind of blew me away that it took this company of dancers, like, I think they learned everything in about 4 weeks. But, you know, in many ways they had to unlearn dance to do it, right? We kind of had to get them to like, not try to like create pretty lines, right? Because this work isn't about pretty lines. But to your point, Morgan, about the repetitive quality of the labor, you know, we learned a lot about doing this work, and how, interestingly, right, if we start with agriculture and then move to industrial labor and then kind of logistics labor, it starts with like the full body, and then the work begins to essentialize different parts of the body over time. Like, we were finding that factory work, right, is all upper body work, and distributional work is kind of all walking. It's just like a lot of walking and maybe pulling something off a shelf. And then what's great to kind of circle back to in the idea of scientific field work, right? The whole body comes back, which we felt really good. And the movements are far more varied, which was really exciting. So yeah, so after we kind of taught the dancers the work, we had a really gorgeous day for performance in June of 2018. And I just, you know, I have no idea what it was like to do this piece in the park, because I was laying face down in the grass so that I wouldn't be seen on camera. So Morgan, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to actually get to do this work in the park? Because you guys had never been to the park before.
We had never been. We were blown away. I think at one point somebody said they felt like they were on the English countryside. Like, it was just ridiculous. And the day, this is a picture from the day, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It was literally that gorgeous. And the first thing we all felt was like, it's so immense. Like, how are we going to hold our space? You know, how are we not going to get lost in this like beauty? But at the same time, it didn't matter, because we were doing, you know, we were doing another performance for another reason. And we did it with a 360 camera, which Nancy will talk about later. And what that basically means is that there's no off camera. There's no off camera, and there's on camera, but at different angles. And so we set our perimeters and hoped for the best. And people were coming in from, I mean, like yards and yards and yards away and apart. And thinking about it, you're just like, oh my gosh, that was so amazing, because everybody started like so far away from each other, and we all kind of communed into a kind of central location around this camera that was sitting
on a pole in the grass.
On a pole, right in the middle of the grass. And so we would do our choreographed like walking patterns. And it was, as you were performing, it's like, you can't get too close to the camera. Don't knock the camera over. It's about this big and black. And the pole was also black, I think. Yeah. And we would kind of not move our mouth, but kind of like ventriloquists, like talk to each other. Because we were just like, okay, don't, the camera's right there, be careful, as we were doing all of this like work around it and moving and dancing. It was totally successful. We loved doing it. I think, how many times did we do it? We did it so many times.
Yeah, like 4 or 5 times. And I know Kate, you and Meryl were actually like down the hill, so you didn't actually get to see it during the time either. I mean, what I love about working with you, Morgan, is like you always, because your perspective is that of a dancer and mine is of a fan of dancers, right? The way that you talk about the work is like totally beyond my kind of set of experiences. And so I will say, for someone who isn't a trained dancer or choreographer, like trying to create a piece for 360 viewing and 360 performance was a real mind puzzle. And to hear you describe what it was like to do it on the park, it also sounds like this work kind of undoes everything you understand about dance in terms of like holding space for yourself in an environment, working in relationship to other dancers. It just feels like this work, because of the scale of the park, like really kind of blew all that up.
Yeah,
in a really interesting way.
Even in performative, like site-specific work, which is the most, related performance to this kind of work, is there's still like site-specific work or even dance for video, like not 360 video. That's a very clear line of, okay, this is the performer and these are the audience, or this is the screen, or this is the camera. And as a dancer, you're always dancing, in a full around the space, but you're always thinking like, okay, I know that that's my focal point, or that's my focal point. But in 360 and in this vastness, there is no something out the window.
Yeah.
But which is good, because it throws the performers back into the fact that it's not about performance, it's about the field work. And that was actually more helpful in the end, because we did the work as needed, not as a performance. None of us were performing. All of us were doing the labor as needed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and so, I mean, to the point about filming in 360, the reason that became a kind of feature of this piece was to emphasize the contrast of scale between the body and the relationship to the scale of the park. And also, right, to let anyone who would encounter this piece the opportunity to kind of feel like they're in the park, right? For me, this is the magic of 360 video. And so, when you watch the piece on YouTube, I just want to talk a little bit about how to best view the piece. So this is what the piece is going to look like in YouTube when you get there. And the link is lots of places, but it'll be at the end of this too. So let me just see. Right, so the first thing you'll want to do before pressing play is you'll want to go down to this little gear down here, and you want to click on it, and it's going to pull up a kind of little menu, and you click on quality to get here. And that's so that the work looks as best as it can. Your home broadband will kind of default to something around here, and it's going to look really kind of blurry and pixelated. To stand a chance of like seeing the work as it's meant, I would kind of hover in this area. And then when you press play, you can your cursor will turn into a little fist that you can drag around the space, or you can use these little arrows, and you can literally just like look up and down and around, and you can revolve the camera. So you can just look at the park. I mean, I think the performers are pretty amazing, but you can just look at the park. And for me, that was like a really important value to put into the piece, right? Is that the park is actually a performer too in this work. Because for me, like being there was such a stunning and special experience. And I know that so few people will get that experience. So it's really important to me to kind of make that a feature of the work. So yeah, we're just about done. Here's the video link. Kate, it's in the Eventbrite, yeah?
Yeah, it is in the Eventbrite. It's also, I just sent it in the chat on here as a link. And then it's also just at freshkillspark.org/Discovery Week in our calendar there.
Thanks. Cool. And the reason actually that we're not doing kind of a live streaming of it together is that it's just too much data to kind of send around to everyone with any sort of readability. So we're excited for everyone to kind of watch this at their leisure, after having a little bit of let's background information. But before we close and folks can watch the piece, I want to thank Kate and Laura for inviting us to Discovery Week Online. I want to thank Dylan and Meryl Kelly for creating the R&D program and the opportunity to make this work. I can stop sharing my thing so I can see you all. And I want to thank Morgan for all that she's brought to our collaboration and everything she's brought, all the pieces we worked on. And to the dancers, Anna, Kaleha, Leanne, and Melissa, for their dedication to the piece, right? Because it's a really unusual piece to kind of sign on for. And lastly, I want to close by saying that a really important outcome of this project, as Morgan was kind of alluding to just a minute ago, is this kind of empathy about what it means to do this work and a kind of awareness of what it means to be a physical laborer, right? And as we embodied this labor and like the often backbreaking work of modern production, even without any of the weight of the instruments and the loads that the workers who do this day in and day out bear, we all gained a bit of a deeper understanding of those who do the work, right? And this project, historic, political, and social structures that have enabled my privilege and opportunity to choose to be an artist and to choose to study this work instead of having to survive by this work. So I hope that in the quest of anti-racism, we can find ways to unpack our own personal roles in structural racism and to continue to find forms that create empathy for others' experiences that can help fuel real and lasting change. And so in this moment, fieldwork inspires me to ask this important question, right? If we can turn a landfill into a park, can we also transform the white supremacist model of economic growth that necessarily drives a consumer lifestyle through anxiety and shame, and one that has historically enslaved and exploited and disposed of as humans in our natural world? Could we do that? You know, and so a future goal or a future phase of this project is like a kind of choreography of undoing this labor, right? And creating a kind of counter choreography that unmakes the stress of this work in various ways and symbolizes change in the system. So that's all I have. Dylan, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, I do actually for both you and Morgan, but I mean, thank you both. That was really incredibly articulated, and I'm also grateful to have learned more about the behind the scenes work on forming these choreographies. I think it's something that you were saying about the kind of layering, and I think maybe the layering of these gestures of labor on the site that contains all of the labor, and that there's something about that that the objects, the detritus of objects and of consumer lifestyle that are basically that are the mounds of Freshkills, that are the bedrock of the future park, that layering these gestures on top of it is really powerful and really significant. And of course, I think you're also thinking through the labor that's happening around it and on top of it all the time. And I guess I'm curious from that kind of point of view of thinking about, maybe in some ways these gestures are also replacing bodies that currently can't be on the site, which I feel like is kind of the other exercise that this piece does, which is that as the public is sort of there invisibly, like the again kind of the invisible labor that's gone into producing that site. But I did have a question on all of this. But I'm just curious how this work has pushed your own practice and the kind of work that you are doing now, and if there is a kind of through line from this recognition of labor and the empathy that you're talking about to continuation either through choreography or other forms with the work you're doing currently?
Lines to my practice, they're kind of very, very hard to see sometimes because I do work on a number of different kinds of things at a single time. I mean, I will say that, you know, the very first impact that working on Freshkills had for me is it actually completely changed my habits of consumption. Absolutely, like every time I throw something away now, I think about Freshkills. I think about where it's going. I think about the impacts of every choice that I make in terms of like buying things and consuming things and discarding things. That has nothing to do with my practice, but that's some real life that came out of this. Yeah, this work is kind of like, you know, in a lot of the current projects I'm working on, from a kind of like trying to understand and embody these kind of large scale engineered geographies, if I can say that, or call Freshkills that. I've been working on a project with Marina Zerko studying an island in the Arabian Gulf that is a man-made nature preserve that's made out of shipping channel dredge spoils as a form of environmental reparations, right? And that work isn't about choreography, but it is about starting to kind of understand the ways in which, you know, this scale of engineering is happening in the world around us and how it impacts us. And so I have a whole new series of work that's about like trying to kind of embody geoengineering in everyday objects. So that's kind of one thing that's been kind of, that's one outcome. And related to that is a kind of triangle between the work that I've been doing on Governor's Island for so many years, and the work at Freshkills, which is like, I've been studying very closely Rikers Island, both as a piece of geography and as a piece of, you know, history, social policy, et cetera, and thinking about the relationship between, like policies, structures, and geographies. So that's kind of how this experience is like bleeding through and informing new works. But yeah, Morgan and I have been talking about creating this kind of idea of like what does it mean to unmake or undo labor, and what is a choreography of unmaking labor? What does that look like? And so that's something that that's like our next project together. What did you say? Playing piano with your toes? Yeah. We were talking about, she's like, well, what do you mean? Is it like playing piano with your toes? Anyways, we don't know what that means yet, but that's something we're excited to think about as we can in our rectangles.
Yeah. From the future.
And yeah, between the past and the future. Yeah, is there anything else? Or should we just?
Yeah, maybe. Do others have? If anybody else here on the Zoom has questions, I had a question for Kate, which I could throw out while people think of questions, unless you want to. If anybody does have a question and wants to unmute, I'm just curious, Kate. You know what the experience is, kind of seeing like fieldwork represented as a choreography.
Yeah, that's a great question.
You know, like as a kind of a aesthetic take on this work that you're doing, and whether that's changed the way that you do the work.
Putting me on the spot, but I don't know if I'd say it changes the way that the work is done. But I know that one of the things I said after seeing the Central Park piece was that I was sort of surprising to me in a way that it looked like fieldwork. Not that should be surprising, right? But just to see someone embody that type of work, who, you know, hadn't been doing it for so many years and who wasn't necessarily like following an actual written protocol as to like why each of the pieces were being done. Definitely, I don't know, it makes the, I guess the movements of that work seem like they have a little bit more beauty to them in a way. And I don't know that I feel more beautiful while doing them, but it's nice to think that like
Life goals.
Yeah,
Life goals.
it is a life goal, but it's nice to think that, you know, some of the movements that we do in those like very like labor oriented movements still have like that layer of meaning as well.
And I think, you know, I asked it a little bit tongue in cheek, you know, as kind of humorously, but I actually think, you know, it's part of the work that this foundational art practice that comes out of, you know, the work of people like Meryl Kelly's, that is really about valorizing these gestures, valorizing these choreographies that we don't think of as choreographies, right? So her like, you know, mechanized choreographies, choreographies of labor, you know, again, kind of valorizing and giving more of a, I think, critiquing the fact that these labors are not perhaps as appreciated in a sense as dance might be, right? They're not put up on a pedestal, and yet when you start to see them, my feeling from this piece and from seeing the 360 piece when we first exhibited it in the exhibition was just that it really does bring a beauty and kind of a recognition of the grace that is in all of our bodies. And so even as we're doing work that is often, you know, like that can be dehumanizing, that can be detrimental to our health, that can be, you know, risky and toxic, that there is this human, you know, ability to move in beauty and grace through that. And I think there's something really powerful in that. And I like this practice of building empathy. And I feel like actually if Freshkills Park were to have some new, you know, slogan or motto, it's like, that's sort of what you're doing. You're building empathy between these creatures out there, you know, between the deer that swam over from New Jersey or whatever, and the coyotes that I keep thinking we're going to see, but maybe you haven't seen any coyotes yet, right? But and you know, and the meadow sparrows that are there, thinking it is English countryside, Morgan. But yeah, so thanks, and that's all I can say. But please, let's open it up if people have other questions. And
Laura, you're on.
I'm unmuting you, Laura. Hold on.
There. Did that work?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I wanted to respond or sort of build on what Dylan was saying, because I talked to Nancy. You watched some people collecting soil samples at Freshkills that I was working with at one point, and they it really made an impression on them that an artist was coming to watch them do collect soil samples, and it made them think about sampling in a little bit different way. And it did, you know, I think they felt a little, they felt sort of special after being watched and after knowing that their movements might inform work that you continued to do.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I mean, this idea that, you know, everything we do is dance, or that dance is everything, right? Kind of comes by way of Yvonne Rainer and the Judson Church group. And even though I'd been studying their work for years, you know, it wasn't until this moment of being at the park and seeing the work there that I actually felt it, right? That I was like, wow, this is like the earth is a choreographer. That is so rad. Right. And just thinking about that is kind of really powerful. And I don't know what happens when we begin to kind of recognize each other's just tasks as something worthy of noticing. I think that's really what art is, right? Art's about shining a light on things and like paying really close attention. And I think for me, that was probably one of the greatest gifts of this particular experience, was the opportunity and the time to pay such close attention to this, like what seemed to be like something really simple, like how people work, and just like really be in it for months and months and months. Yeah, it's, you know, it's a gift that I like gets to travel with me, because now I watch people with a kind of choreographer's eye for as much as I have one. And I think I'm so glad that it translated actually for the folks that were part of my research. So it seems like, I don't know if there's any other questions. I can't see anyone, but it's...
Or anyone else on the call, or Marielle? Yeah, Marielle.
Oh, I was able to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Laura and Kate and other team members for organizing, and thank you all for presenting this work. It's so important and great to see it again, and hear some more information about the background and how you're thinking about it at this stage. I'm curious if the experience of producing this kind of work and choreographing this kind of work in a space is fairly remote as far as we're concerned as New Yorkers and those living in dense cities like Hong Kong, can consider it, and at a time between landfill and park where it's fairly empty of humans, as you mentioned, Nancy, if there's anything that you're drawing from it now, looking back and considering our current moment of isolation, and maybe stepping out of the Brady Bunch or Hollywood Square modality and thinking about performance in outdoor spaces or other spaces that have that sense of isolation still. And if there's anything that you're thinking about at this point that's reframing the very concept of performance without an audience, but also fairly remote or isolated from others in space.
So is the question, am I reconceiving of performance in this moment, or am I or what do I think about performance in isolated places?
Is this work inspiring any new thoughts about performance in general?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm gonna lay my cards on the table. The only reason I knew about 360 video was because of Bjork video. And I thought it was so amazing that I could watch the landscape, right? And so in terms of performance, like what I think something like 360 video does is it totally unmakes everything we understand about performance. It totally unmakes everything we understand about like all the binaries, performer and audience and front, backstage and on stage and off stuff, and it exposes everything. And it necessarily makes the space as it is, that it's in, like another performer. And so for me, for someone who has like been a super kind of landscape nerd my whole life, for a while I thought I was going to be Ansel Adams in like high school. It's so exciting to me to think how the landscape is a performance, right? Both performer and performance. And certainly like right now in thinking about what is performance, I feel like for myself in quarantine or isolation, performance is kind of recognizing the kind of specialness of life. And that sounds like like a little too groovy even for me. But what I mean by that, like, right, if my kind of like horsey definition of art is that art is about paying really close attention, I feel like performance is about living that attention, right? And like allowing there to be a kind of care in everything we do. I'm curious as to what Morgan thinks about that. How do you define performance?
You don't anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like you just don't, not anymore. I mean, nah. I don't find the word performance to have much meaning anymore, to be honest.
Why is that?
Because Well, we don't have time for that, but I think, I mean, I think it's just, it was always going to come to this point. I don't think that, you know, the situation, the world, global situation we're in has sped it up at any moment, but ever since Judson Church and ever since something simple like, I mean, like, I always come back to site-specific dance, but that's what it is. I mean, there is, the only thing that makes it a performance is you sell tickets to it, I guess. Like there's no line anymore between performance and non-performance. And I think it's like kind of it's like a dissolving relationship between performer and audience, or vice versa. And I think we're just like on a natural, like as far as the dance world goes, we're on a natural path to having any movement and any moment be a performance. So
what's interesting to me is that I would totally agree with you, except that I think living the Zoom life, right, has like intensified the
wall, like
yeah. I mean, we're all right. We're all living in the frontal plane. We're all kind of we're like two-dimensional creatures now. And I just don't know why people aren't showing up with puppets, right? Like there's
still like the aspect of like having everything be everything, right? Like I can turn off my video and go into my kitchen. Like it's still the 360-degree aspect of like you can still have everything be incorporated into a performance. So I totally agree with you, but I think it's this like the way you frame it. You know. But yeah, I don't know.
It's a good question, Meryl. It's a lot to think about there. Sorry, I had to turn off my.
I actually have to go start my day.
Oh yeah, you have to go. Sorry, I promised you.
Thank you all so much.
Morgan.
Lovely
Thank
seeing you. Have a wonderful
yes,
day.
Thanks for being with us this morning.
Okay,
and
bye.
See you
Take
soon.
care. Thank you so much for everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and on that, maybe we can say enjoy the video, and don't forget to move around with your tiny little digital fist. Just look at the sky. The sky was beautiful.
Let us all go virtually to Freshkills.
Let's all go virtually to Freshkills. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Laura.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody at Freshkills Park Alliance. Thank you. Thanks, Mario.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah. Hope to see y'all in 360 soon.
Take care. Stay safe, everybody, and hopefully Discovery Day in the fall will be in person.
Yeah. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Bye.